Okay, we're on lecture 17, and this is Song of Songs, and setting the timer here. So we'll talk about the introductory material as we always do, the title of the book. Most English translations have the title of the book as the Song of Songs. Some will have Song of Solomon. Song of Songs is a literal translation of the Hebrew title, Shir HaShirim. The repetition of the noun in the genitive is called the construct. In Hebrew expresses the superlative. For example, the phrase Holy of Holies indicates the superlative holy place. And so you have Shir, which means song. Ha is the article the, and then Shirim is songs. It's plural of Shir. And so you have the Shir HaShirim means the superlative of songs, the song of songs, the highest song. The authorship of the book, the opening verse appears to attribute authorship to Solomon by using, as we've seen before, and we saw this especially in the Psalms, the Hebrew preposition lamed attached to Shlomo, Solomon's name. Some scholars suggest that the lamed formula here is dedication. It's a book written, dedicated to Solomon instead of referring to authorship. Yet most uses of this formula refer to authorship. The uniform tradition of Jewish and Christian scholars supports Solomon as being the author. 1 Kings 4:32 tells us that Solomon composed 1,005 songs. There are some difficulties with Solomonic authorship. One is, how does the love pictured in this book fit in with what's pictured in the historical books of Solomon with many wives? And perhaps this is early on in his life. Another difficulty, why does the book seem to look at Solomon at a distance? And we might say, well, it's a poetic book. These difficulties have caused some conservative scholars to argue for partial authorship by Solomon, or that the book has an anonymous author. I'm not convinced by these. I believe Solomon is the author of the book, and it may picture something early in his life. Background of the book. Smith suggests the following background. And we're going to look at a couple of scenarios here. I don't know whether I completely agree with Smith and with Lehman in Sonsino book, but I want to at least that we be aware of their views of the background. He said Solomon took the throne about 970 BC. And as we mentioned, he was famous for his many wives and concubines from 1 Kings 11, verse 3. Most of those marriages were political alliances. But on a trip to the northern part of his land up in Galilee, the king met and fell in love with a beautiful maiden, and she was given by her brothers in marriage to Solomon. The maiden, the Shulamite maiden, however, loved a shepherd back in the country. The book then is the story of Solomon's struggle to win her to true love and her steadfast determination to remain faithful to her beloved, who is the shepherd. Others understand the third main actor in the book not as the shepherd, but as a chorus, or the daughters of Jerusalem. And then this view would understand the shepherd as Solomon. So you have Solomon, who is the shepherd, the Shulamite maiden, and then the daughters of Jerusalem. The first view seems the best, but again, there are difficulties, and I'm probably going to go with the second view. Lehrman, in the Sonsino books of the Bible, gives the following overview, which is along the line of Smith's, but I want to go through it, at least so that we will be familiar with it. And this is directly from the Sonsino books. The book describes the trials of a beautiful peasant maiden from Shunem, or Shulem. who was employed by her mother and brothers as a shepherdess to their flock of goats. She had fallen in love with a shepherd of the same village, but the brothers did not look with approval on the union. They accordingly transferred her services from the pasture to the vineyards, in the hope that there her meetings with her lover, the shepherd, would not be possible. One day, as she was tending the vines, she was seen by the servants of King Solomon when he chanced to pass the village on his way to his summer resort in Lebanon. Impressed by her beauty, they try to persuade her to accompany them. She refuses and is finally led away as a captive to the king's chambers. No sooner does the king behold her when he too falls in love with her. He sings her beauty and uses all his endeavors to induce her to abandon her shepherd for the love and wealth that he can shower upon her. The ladies of the court also join in trying to dislodge her love for the humble shepherd. Her heart, however, belongs to him, and she remains steadfast. During her stay in the palace, she yearns for her lover, for the shepherd, and is tantalized by the taunts of the ladies of the court that he has rejected her. In her agitated state of mind, she speaks to him as if he were in her presence, and even dreams that he's come to rescue her and escort her back to her mother's home. Awaking from her dream, she rushes out of her chamber to seek him in the streets, where she's roughly treated by the watchmen of the city, who misjudge her character. When the king is finally convinced of the constancy of her love for the shepherd, he dismisses her from his presence and allows her to return home. She's now joined by her lover, and leaning on his arm, approaches Shunem, where a warm welcome awaits her. They come upon the scene so dear to them. She recounts the vicissitudes through which she had lately passed. The story ends on a triumphant note. Not only could her love not be extinguished by the temptations offered by the king, but she also assures her brothers that their solicitude for her virtue was unwarranted. She had proved that love is capable of heroic endurance. The tale she tells to their assembled friends makes a strong protest against the luxury and vice of the court, of Solomon's court, and pays testimony to the beauty and dignity of pure love and fidelity. Another view that we've hinted at is that this involves Solomon, who owned vineyards in Galilee, that's in the north, and a peasant girl from Shunem, who was working among the vines and was bullied by her brothers. When Solomon came into the area to check on his flocks, he saw the girl in the vines, and it was love at first sight. The couple fall in love, become engaged, and are married, and the book pictures their honeymoon and a falling out after the honeymoon. And some scholars argue it's just a poem of married love, and you don't have this engagement and marriage and honeymoon and the falling out. But that's the outline I'm going to use. It's a difficult verse because it's book because it's difficult to determine exactly who's speaking at which time. So this view holds that the shepherd is Solomon, and the actors in the story then are Solomon, the Shulamite maiden, and a chorus of women. And this view holds that Solomon and the Shulamite maiden are married, and the other views hold that they may or may not be married. The geographical setting for the dialogue is for the most part in Solomon's Jerusalem palace. The song, however, mentions a number of places. Most of these are located in northern Israel, Transjordan, and Syria. And among these are these names, and some of these names, like the fourth one here, Mahanaim, may be a proper name, or it may be a name for describing something else. But Beter, Mount Gilead, Tirzah, Mahanaim, En-Gedi, Lebanon, Amana, Shanir, Hermon, Heshbon, Damascus, Carmel, and Baal-Kamon. The nature of the book. There are several suggestions of what the book is. The first one, some scholars suggest the book is parallel to collections of love poetry of the ancient Near East. So it's a collection of love poems. Some suggest it's like Egyptian love poems, and others point out parallels to songs that were used during wedding ceremonies among the Arab people. In critique of this, the book appears to be one poem, not just a collection. The individual units may stand alone, but they fit together better than a haphazard collection. Smith gives 6 points for the unity of the book. First, he says there is a continuity of theme. Second, there is a chain-like structure binding one part to the preceding. Third, the title points to the view that the book was a single composition. Fourth, there is the absence of headings to mark off individual units. Fifth, the same appeal formula is found 3 times in 2:7, 3:5, and 8:4. And then sixth, there is the appearance of the same leading characters throughout. Again, there's a little bit of difficulty exactly, who are these 3 characters? Are they a shepherd, Solomon, and then the maiden, and the daughters of Jerusalem? Or are they Solomon, who is the shepherd, the maiden, and then the daughters of Jerusalem? But there is a unity of the book, it appears. So one suggestion for the nature of the book is a collection of poems, of love poems. Another suggestion for the book that's been put forth of the nature of the book is that it is a drama. And by this is meant seeing it like a dramatic reading with speaking parts for various characters. And again, the problem with this view is that the various speakers are not clearly identified in the text. And this approach may be partly true, that it is like a drama, but a difficulty is the poem moves from scene to scene without filling in the connecting links. So we don't know always who's talking, and we don't know all the backstory of what's going on. If it is a drama, it appears it would be would give us more information. The spirit of the book. Smith asks, why would Solomon write an account of one of his romantic failures? So, again, there's a presupposition from Smith that it is a romantic failure and that you have Solomon, the shepherd, and the Shulamite maiden. He answers this with some suggestions. He says, perhaps he learned from the maiden what true love is all about. Perhaps this is the kind of love to which he aspired and which he meant to encourage in his readers. Perhaps the book, like Ecclesiastes, recognizes that wealth and power have their limitations. Both were defeated by the power of the love of a maid that should be for the man of her choice. So there is presupposition that Smith has is that Solomon is not married to the Shulamite maiden. If this book is a picture of married love between Solomon and the Shulamite maiden, then this whole question, why would Solomon write an account of his romantic failures, is not a true question. The canonicity of the book, there was difficulty of accepting the book in the canon. The Mishnah, Jewish writing, states that there were rabbinic discussions over whether the book renders the hands unclean. That's a technical expression in rabbinic literature that refers to canonicity. The idea is that a holy book would make the hands unclean. And so it was thought by some rabbis that the book did not make the hands unclean, so it was not a holy book. The exact background of that expression is unclear, but the intent is that such a book that renders the hands unclean is referring to a holy book that should be included in the canon. The book was a part of the canon Josephus accepted and indicates that it was also part of the scriptures which Jesus and the apostles accepted. The place in the Hebrew canon, in the Hebrew Bible, the book is normally placed first in the collection of 5 small scrolls called Megillot. And that word means scrolls. And we saw this when we talked about Kohelet or Ecclesiastes. The Megillot are a part of the Ketuvim. That's the writings, and that's the third great division of the Tanakh that we've talked about repeatedly. The T stands for Torah, law, the N, Nevi'im, the prophets, the K, Ketuvim, the writings. And so this book is in the Megalot, the scrolls in the Ketuvim. And the 5 Megalot were read during the year at special festivals. Song of Songs was assigned to be read at Passover. All right, let's talk about the interpretation of the book. This book is the most obscure in the Hebrew Bible. Whether it's a collection of love poems or a drama, we don't know for sure, does not fully decide the issue of interpreting the book. Some scholars suggest that the key verse is 6:3. Dodi li va'ani lo. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. And the question is the identity of the beloved. The most common approach to the book among Christians and Jews has been the allegorical interpretation. And Jewish allegorical interpretation saw the book as either an allegory of the relationship between Yahweh and Israel, or the history of Israel from the Exodus to the age of the Messiah, or either as the desirability of wisdom. So in other words, this view doesn't view the book as a literal love story, but as an allegorical picture of either Yahweh and Israel, the history of Israel, or the desirability of wisdom. The rabbis had strong warnings about the use of the book. Rabbi Akiva is reported to have said, "He who trills his voice in the chanting of the Song of Songs in the banquet halls and makes it a secular song has no share in the life to come." Jerome, an early writer, non-Jewish writer, repeated the rabbinic tradition that a person was not permitted to read the book until he had reached the age of 30. The Christian allegorical interpretation was based on the Jewish allegorical interpretation, but the Christians found expressions in the book of love and commitment between Christ and the church. So that's the allegorical interpretation. A critique of this allegorical method of interpreting the book was the main interpretation until the middle of the 19th century. Smith gives several reasons that this allegorical interpretation fell out of favor. First, a more sophisticated and biblical attitude toward human sexuality began to emerge. Second, the discovery of similar love poems in the ancient Near East caused scholars to realize that this type of literature was common. So it's not allegorical, it's love poems. Third, the increasing realization that this method was totally subjective. In other words, you make the allegory stand for whatever the interpreter might want or think. The second interpretation of the book is not an allegorical interpretation, but a topological interpretation, the topological method. And this might be called the literal/topological method. The book may celebrate an actual relationship between Solomon and a maiden. Because, however, Solomon is a type of Christ, this marriage must have been intended by God to be typical of the relationship between Christ and His church. And we have to be careful with this, but I do think in some ways, like Paul would say, and we'll talk about this later in Ephesians 5, that marriage is an illustration of the relationship between Christ and His church, that there is some truth to this. It is a literal love story, but also there can be a topological interpretation. Yet, it's true that Solomon in his office as king was typical of Christ. That doesn't indicate that in respects he previewed Christ in all respects. Further, a marriage, as Smith suggests, never actually takes place in the book. And I'm going to suggest probably that Solomon and the Shulamite maiden are married. The true beloved of the maiden in the book was probably a shepherd, not Solomon, Smith says. But again, this is a difference in how we understand the book and how we may come to some interpretation of the book. The third way, so there's allegorical, which views the book as just a picture of a relationship between Yahweh and Israel or Christ and the church, and it has no literal interpretation. Then there's topological interpretation, which views Solomon as a type of Christ and the maiden as a type of the church. Then there is the literal method, and generally the literal method of interpreting the book is the most popular today. I would say that the best interpretation is a literal topological interpretation. It seems if the literal method is adopted, the main difficulty is what is the main purpose and moral of the book? What's it designed to teach by its inclusion in the canon? Well, it could teach the value of married love. It could teach if the view of the book is that the two are not married, that love is preeminent. Layman, in his Cincino books, comments, the main moral of the book is that love, besides being the strongest emotion in the human heart, can also be the holiest. God has given the gift of love to sweeten the toil of the laborer, as in the case of Jacob, to whom the 14 years in which he toiled for Rachel appeared but a few days, for the love he had for her. That's in Genesis 29:20. Lehrman continues, love transfigures and hallows or makes holy, but it is a boon that requires zealously to be guarded and sheltered from abuse. This book pictures love as a reward enjoyed only by the pure and simple, a joy not experienced by the pleasure-seeking monarch and the indolent ladies of the court. So his view, again, is that Solomon is not the shepherd and that he is a pleasure-seeking monarch. It is a joy reserved for the loyal and the constant and is denied to the sensual and dissolute. Some have found offense in its freeness of expression, but it is debatable whether there may not be a deeper purity in the frank recognition of such subjects and straightforward language about them than in the veiled circumlocutions we find in modern literature. The book is not for children, but for men and women who should welcome delicate matters openly stated rather than uncleanly imagined. So whether you agree with his final premise or not, I think he has some good thoughts, and that's one there. Besides, manners change with the passage of time, and what may seem to moderns coarse and sensuous was considered natural and pure in an earlier period. The moral of the story, another view. If the book pictures the love, courtship, and marriage of Solomon and the Shulamite maiden, then the teaching of the book is about the physical relations in the context of marriage. And that agrees with other passages in the Bible that limit sexual relations to the context of marriage. Does the book approve of premarital sexual relations? Some have alleged that the book approves of premarital sex. Some view 4:16 through 5:1 as describing the marriage between Solomon and the Shulamite, and that's probably where I'm going to find myself. However, it's argued that the language of the first 3 chapters suggests sexual involvement between the two. And 1:12 through 17 and 2:3 through 6. Most people point to those passages. To avoid such an implication, scholars argue that the book has a chiastic arrangement and is not chronological. It is said that there is an orderly progression of themes and ideas in the first 4 chapters. The book then pivots at 4:16 through 5:1 and presents the same themes and ideas in reverse order through the last 4 chapters. Smith again notes that such a chiastic literary approach is unnecessary, and he gives 5 points in response to the argument that the book approves of premarital sexual relations. First, he says, nowhere does the text actually say that the lovers were married. it does in chapters 4 and 5, whoever's speaking calls the Shulamite maiden his bride. But the book must be interpreted within the teaching of God, which clearly prohibits any pre- or extramarital sexual relations. And that's underscored. That's something that we must hold to. Second, the passages which allegedly indicate premarital sex between Solomon and the Shulamite woman have been misinterpreted. And that may be, and that is something I think that's important. The most one could say is that these passages reflect sexual desire. Third, the Shulamite regards herself as a model of chastity and virtue. Certain passages reflect a chaste relationship between the Shulamite and her shepherd. Smith doesn't think that's Solomon. I think it probably is. The metaphors used of her in the book point to her virtue. She is a tower in 4:4, 7:4, a wall in 8:10, or Mount Carmel in 7:5. References to her dove-like qualities also describe her purity in 1:15, 2:14, and 4:1. And these arguments are from Smith. Whatever we say, the book does not approve of premarital sexual relations. Is the book speaking of marriage, sexual relations? Smith argues there's no marriage in the book. As I mentioned, however, in chapter 4, the speaker, is it Solomon, calls the Shulamite maiden bride 4 times in 4:8 through 11. Could the book be speaking of sexual relations in a marriage context? And I think yes. And we will follow this view in the outline exegesis. Now remember the difficulty that we mentioned previously of determining exactly who is speaking in the various passages of the book. So we're going to go briefly through this outline exegesis. And this is not a detailed exegesis. And this video may be shorter than the other videos, but first thing is open your Bibles, and I'll give you the source for this outline at the end of the outline. And some think that this may be pushing it, and it may be, but this is where I'm at right now. So chapter 1:1 through 2:7, after the title in 1:1, Shir HaShirim Asher La Shalomo, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Then we have, according to some, the couple fall in love, and this goes through 2:7. The book opens with the Shulamite longing to be kissed by the handsome king. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. And he's impressed with her, stating that she is as beautiful as one of Pharaoh's mares in verse 9 of chapter 1. Also in this, there is the struggle, I think, between her brothers, and that they are bullying her, and she's having to work in the vineyard. About this Pharaoh's, this steed in Pharaoh's chariots, Laman comments, the beauty of the Egyptian horse suggested a comparison which is strange to the Western mind, but frequent in Arabic poetry. And then in 2:7, so this is the couple fall in love in 1:1 through 2:7. And in 2:7 is a refrain that is found 3 times. And the couple are cautioned not to become physically intimate until the time is right, until they are married. And to go back, notice she describes him in glowing terms, and he describes her in glowing terms. And you have, like in 2:1, I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. And we even have songs that come out of that. Verse 4 of chapter 2, he brought me to the banqueting house, and his banner over me is love. Songs that come out of that. But in 2:7, the couple are cautioned not to become intimate until the time is right, and I would understand that until they are married. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and by the hinds of the field, that you awaken not, nor stir up love until its proper time, the time is right. So the first major section, if we follow this outline, the couple fall in love, 1:1 through 2:7. 2:8 through 3:5 is the second major section, and the couple become engaged. With great anticipation, the maiden is looking forward to the next visit from Solomon. So Solomon probably is in Jerusalem in his palace, and in the north is where she lives. And he came up there, he fell in love with her, she fell in love with him, and now she's looking forward to his next visit, and she can hardly believe when he shows up. In 2:8, hark, my beloved, behold, he comes, leaping upon the mountains, skipping upon the hills. He says in 2:10 and also verse 13, come with me, arise, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. And she, if this is an engagement, she accepts his proposal, exclaiming in 2:16, which is a famous verse from the book, and it's usually inscribed on rings in Israel and different necklaces. Dodi levi ni lo, my beloved is mine, and I am his. And she can hardly wait for the wedding day. And she misses her beloved when he is not near. And in chapter 3, perhaps that's a dream that she has. Perhaps she is seeking him. I don't know. And then in verse 5, you have that refrain again that we had in 2:7. And the close of this section, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and by the hinds of the field, that you awaken not, nor stir up love until the proper time. So the couple is cautioned against yielding to the temptation of premarital sex. So we have, they fell in love, maybe the engagement, and then in chapter 3, 6 through 10, perhaps the royal wedding. So the day finally comes when Solomon comes for this Shulamite maid in a carriage escorted by 60 warriors. I mean, who is this that comes up out of the wilderness like pillars of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all powders of the merchant? Behold, it is Solomon, and he has 60 mighty men about him, of the mighty men of Israel. His bodyguards, I guess, to protect him. And in verse 8, they all handle the sword and they're expert in war. In verse 9, King Solomon has made himself this, it's a difficult word, like a couch to recline upon this, or bed, maybe, of the wood of Lebanon. And he has made the pillars of silver and the top of gold, the seat of purple, inlaid with love from the daughters of Jerusalem. So it's probably picturing the day of his wedding, the day that his heart rejoiced. Chapter 4, so that's 3, 6 through 10. Go forth of this day of his wedding. And then in chapter 4, 1 through 5:1 is, some have suggested, the honeymoon. And in this section, the groom describes his wife's body in detail. He says that her eyes are doves behind the veil, her hair is a flock of goats, glossy as black goats that lead down from Mount Gilead. Her teeth are like a flock of ewes, all shaped alike. Her lips are like a thread of scarlet. Her mouth is comely. The temples are like pomegranate split open. Her neck is like the Tower of David. So this is poetic, figurative language. And as we mentioned, he calls her his bride 5 times in this section. You ravished my heart, my sister, my bride. And the word for sister here is certainly not a literal sister, but a word for someone who has become dear to him. And then the bride invites her groom to come into his garden and taste its choice fruits. There's some probably explicit language here under used in poetic form. And he does, and he tells us, I've come into my garden, my bride. I've gathered my myrrh with my spice. I've eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I've drunk my wine and my milk in 5:1. And their friends encourage them to drink their fill of love. See, at the end of 5:1, who is speaking there, and is it their friends? I don't know, but it makes sense that their friends encourage them to celebrate their love. And this passage is graphic, yet it's veiled in figurative terms that appropriately convey the beauty of the intimacy of marriage without being vulgar. The next section is 5:2 through 6:3, I guess, and some have suggested that this is a falling out between the two. So after the honeymoon, the couple has a falling out. One night in verses 2 and 3, it appears Solomon wants to have relations with his wife, but she is too tired. And he storms out, apparently headed to the royal harem, and the bride chases after him, but she can't find him. And to make matters worse, in verses 6 and 7, she is out in the streets of Jerusalem at night, and she is mugged. In verse 7, they struck me, the watchmen struck me, they wounded me, either mugged or they're punishing her for being out, and she is maybe thought to be a loose woman. That doesn't stop her, and she gives a detailed physical description of Solomon to her friends, asking them to watch for him. She says, my beloved is white and ruddy, preeminent among 10,000. His head is as the most fine gold. His locks are curled and black as raven. His eyes are like doves beside the water brooks, washed with milk and fitly set. His cheeks are as a bed of spices, as banks of sweet herbs. His lips are as lilies, dropping with flowing myrrh, and so on. You can read that in chapter, it'd actually be chapter 5, 10 through 16, and not 6, 10 through 16. And she fears that her husband, where is he gone? In chapter 6, my beloved, is gone down to his garden. And to the bed of spices, to feed in the garden, to gather lilies, to browse in the garden and gather lilies. And this is probably poetic language that she fears that he has gone to seek sexual relations among the harem. Then in chapter 6, verse 3, you have again the statement again, Ani la dodi va dodi li, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. And that's the phrase usually that's on rings and necklaces in Israel, but it's a variant of the one that we've seen before. I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. If he's gone to browse in the gardens, and that is metaphorical language, then she knows their marriage must be kept sexually exclusive, because I am my beloved and my beloved is mine. Chapter 6 in verse 4 through chapter 8 in verse 4 is the makeup. So there's been an argument, and he has gone out. She's gone to look for him. She can't find him. And then the husband quickly realizes his mistake. He returns to her confessing that she is his dove, the perfect one, unique. And it goes back through the same description. And in chapter 6 and verse 13, the friends beg the Shulamite to return to him. And then he gives another graphic description of her body from her feet to her hair. How beautiful are the steps of your sandals. And then he continues on. He longs in verses 8 and 9 to enjoy her pleasures again. And then she reciprocates his feelings in verses 9 and 10 of chapter 7. And they go, it appears in chapter 11, on a second honeymoon. So you have that phrase again, Ani ledodi va ali. I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. Come, my beloved, let us go forth into the field, let's lodge in the villages. So it appears they're going on a honeymoon back up to the north. They're on that second honeymoon. They resume their passionate partnership in chapter 8, 1 through 3. Their love is so stirring that it ends with another warning, and it appears this time it is to readers about not yielding to the temptation of premarital sexual relations. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, why should you awaken or stir up love until it pleases or until the proper time? So in chapter 8, 5 through 14, we have the conclusion. And some have suggested that the final paragraphs here summarizes their relationship from the opening meeting to the concluding lesson. It says that the couple met in Solomon's vineyard in Baal Harmon. And the overriding teaching of the book is summed up in verse 7. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. If a man would give all the substance of his house for love, he would utterly be contemned. The permanence of this love. Song of Songs pictures, from the viewpoint that we're looking at this outline, pictures God's ideal for marriage, an exclusive marital relationship of deep friendship, emotional bonding, physical pleasure, and enduring permanence. Misunderstandings and conflicts may occur, but when a couple is committed to God's plan for marriage and life, nothing can quench the love that God gives them one for the other. In a good marriage, a biblical marriage, a couple is always wanting to get away to enjoy each other's intimacy, saying, as we read in the last verse of the book, then make haste or come away, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young deer on the spice-laden mountains, the mountains of spice. And that's where the book ends. Now, the source of this outline and this understanding is found in several sources, and there are some books that follow this type of understanding. The one I followed is found at robertjmorgan.com. Now, as I mentioned, there are difficulties with this understanding, yet this is my understanding at this time. Now what I want to do is look at another website that I found was helpful. And this is 3 Reasons You Should Preach Through the Song of Solomon. And this is by Aaron Minikoff, and it's found at 9marks.com. This is quotes from that webpage. The Song of Songs certainly is about marriage, as we've seen. However, since marriage is a window into the relationship between Christ and the church, as Paul says in Ephesians 5, the Song of Songs is about the gospel too. The book is an explicit but tasteful song designed to point singles to patience, spouses to each other, and everyone to Christ. So this would be a mixture of the literal topological interpretation. It's not an allegory, nor is it a sex manual. It is the poetic description of a romance between a husband and a wife. Minikoff writes, most people have a distorted view of sex. The path to this view has been paved by the likes of Sigmund Freud, who boiled sex down to the physical action of releasing sexual tension, and Esther Perel, and he has the footnotes of where these are found, who quite recently argued in defense of infidelity. We should be grateful for a book like the Song of Songs that explores in poetic detail the one flesh union of Genesis 2:24. But the song is also a precious remedy for those with a distorted view of the church. He says, a church should have a love for Christ that can't be measured by seating capacity. It's a love that is captured artfully in the Song of Songs. So he makes 3 points. The first point is the song argues commitment is foundational to sex and marriage. The wife of the book enjoys being with her husband. With great delight I sat in his shadow, she exclaims in 2:3, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. And the husband is equally intoxicated by her. Your lips are like a scarlet thread, and your mouth is lovely in 4:3. As erotic as the language of the Song of Songs may be, it is never unhitched from commitment. In other words, the sexual activity described is always experienced in the context of a marriage covenant. For example, the wife says of her husband, his banner over me is love in 2:6. This banner is a military standard. It's the flag that united an army. It's her way of saying, I belong to him and he belongs to me. This is the context of their intimacy. Later on, the wife says of her husband, my beloved is mine and I am his, in 2:16 and 6:3. She says this before noting how he grazes among the lilies. And the careful reader cannot but help see the larger point, is the intimacy that they have is to be unique among them. It's not the quality of the sex that makes their love good, it's the quality of their love that makes their sex good. Their marriage is marked and blessed by intimacy and commitment, and these two are not to be severed. The poem ends with a similar sentiment. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death, jealousy is fierce as the grave. Real love lasts because it's not a one-night flight, but a lifelong commitment. True love is sealed by commitment. So that's the first point that he makes. The song argues commitment is foundational to sex and marriage. The second point he makes is the song provides practical wisdom for married couples. Godly spouses use words to encourage one another. The husband calls his wife the most beautiful among women in 1:8. Whether this is an objective reality is not the point. She's clearly the apple of his eye. He repeatedly uses speech to express his appreciation for her. You've captivated my heart, he tells her. You've captivated my heart with one glance of your eyes in 4:9. The point isn't that a godly husband needs to be a poet. The point is he ought to use words to show how much he cares for his wife. Likewise, the wife gives praise to her husband. Your love is better than wine in 1:2. Calls on him to pursue her. Draw me after you. Let us run in 1:4. Godly spouses also guard against the sin of a fallen world. In 2:15, the wife urges her husband to catch the little foxes for us, the little foxes that spoil the vineyards. And the vineyard is their marriage, pictured as a field that needs to be tended or it will be destroyed by hungry invaders. This means admitting when the relationship is strained. I sought him but found him not, in 3:1, and working hard to improve it. I held him and would not let him go, in 3:4. They guard against sin by pursuing each other physically, in 4:1, 5 through 5:1, and affirming in a regular way their commitment to one another, 4:9, 7:10, and 8:6. Song of Songs is wisdom literature. It's here to help us live as well as we can in a fallen and broken world. The author, guided by the Holy Spirit, calls married couples to the hard work of fidelity. So that is the second point that he makes. The song provides practical wisdom for married couples. The third point and final point that he makes is the song presents marriage as a foretaste of perfect union with God. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed, in Genesis 2:25. The purity of their relationship with each other was possible because they enjoyed an uncorrupted relationship with their Maker. It's no surprise then that terms that are Edenic or that are echo the Garden of Eden are used to describe the intimate relationship between the husband and wife in the Song of Songs. Here's some examples. 1:16 and 17. Behold, you're beautiful, my beloved, truly delightful. Our couch is green, the beams of our house are cedar, our rafters are pine. So it's almost like being in a garden. 4:11, your lips drip nectar, my bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue. Honey and milk. Your shoots are an orchard of pomegranates with choicest fruit. Henna with nard in 4:13. In the Hebrew Bible, the promised land is described as a land flowing with milk and honey. In Exodus 3:8, as you know, so is the marriage in the Song of Songs. And so this husband and wife have recaptured something of the delight and innocence of the Garden of Eden. The Song of Songs is to be read and preached in light, he argues, in light of the entire biblical canon and through the lens of Ephesians 5:31 and 32, where we learn marriage is a mystery that refers to Christ and the church. So there's a parallel between marriage, a husband and wife, and Christ and the church, according to the inspired Apostle Paul. It is through Christ that justified sinners find their home in a new promised land. The Song of Songs really does point forward to Christ, as the wife longs to be with her husband in 1:4, 3:1 through 4. So the Christian longs to be with Christ, Philippians 1:23. As the husband woos his wife with words, 4:1 through 16. So Christ woos us with his word, John 10:27. As the love of a husband and wife is to be indelible, 8:6. Of Song of Songs, so nothing can separate us from the love of Christ, Romans 8:37 through 39. As we mentioned, the allegorical interpretation of the Jewish people, for centuries, they read the Song of Songs aloud in preparation for the Passover. They didn't view it as a literal interpretation, they viewed it as allegorical, but this writer says, why did they do this? Because in the Song of Songs, they saw more than wisdom for marital living. They saw something of God's covenant love for his people. In Isaiah 54, verse 5, for your Maker is your husband, the Lord of hosts is his name, and the Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. So we're going to stop here in this lecture, this discussion of Song of Songs. It's a difficult book, one of the most difficult in the Hebrew Bible, but I would view it as a literal topological interpretation. It is a literal love story, and perhaps it's best to see it as a love story between Solomon and this maiden, and the difficulties that they have, and then their marriage. And also that is pointing, as we just saw in this article, to a typological picture of Christ and his church from Ephesians chapter 5. Okay, so we're going to stop right there on this lecture of the Song